This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale. This week, we've got some half-off action going. So from Monday, April 12th at 11 a.m. through Monday, April 19th at 10:59 a.m., there's half off of hundreds of Magic cards on StarCityGames.com/sale. That's S-A-L-E. So scroll through those 50-plus pages, see if you run into more than enough things to overflow your cart. I know I found some, let's see, 9th edition foil Stone Rain. Anyone else into that kind of old school spiciness? If you're not into that, there's just dozens and dozens of rares that I forgot existed that you might not even know existed for your commander decks. There's, if you listen to the Receivables, Invasion Wall of Text Psychic Battle. But again, you only have until next Monday to get to the end of that text box. So you might want to hurry up on that one. And even if you don't see anything, guess what? Monday, 11 a.m., April 19th, new sale goes up. And just check. You know, every week, this is just rolling over, and there's just really an overflow of things that you might be able to find in these Star City Games weekly sales. So keep looking, keep checking, and I am absolutely sure that the thing you are looking for, or the thing you didn't even know you were looking for, is going to show up on this page one week.
This episode of Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Head over to coalesceapparel.shop and check out their weekly sale. And when you do decide to keep it 100 or to join me on the Maritlay 2020 campaign, use the gift code SEG to get 10% off at checkout. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Dominaria's Judgment, brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where every week we'll be going over the latest developments in the modern format, from the decks at the top all the way to the nonsense on the fringes of the format that help to give modern its charm. And to do that, I will be joined in here every week by Pro Tour Cons of Target champion and one of the finest minds and writers in the game for over a decade now, active Twitter participant, dog enthusiast, Ari Lax.
Wow, that is quite the intro. Thank you, and I'm glad I did not have to think of something quite as eloquent for yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I'm setting the bar high there, and I don't know if I need to keep topping that every week, because maybe there will be enough familiarity with the two of us eventually that I don't need to do that anymore, but I really am setting myself up for a bind there.
Oh, absolutely. At some point, you can only add so many adjectives in the hour to 2 hours that we have.
Absolutely. So let's get right into this. And our task for today is to go over Strixhaven, the new set that's about to drop on Magic Online, Arena, and hopefully before too long in paper as well. And a consensus already seems to be forming that this is a weak set for Constructed in general and specifically for Modern. And I know you, for one, are pushing back against that. So what's your big picture overview of this set and its implications for Modern?
I think that a lot of people have forgotten what Magic looked like before War of the Spark. So since about War of the Spark, every good card has just been a permanent with 80,000 words that casts a spell when it enters the battlefield and then continues to cast spells over and over. All the Uros and Okos of the world. And before that, there were creatures and they did the creature thing. Sometimes your creatures were spells with a small body, and then there were good spells. And a lot of the best sets were these sets that had cards that were just no one knew what to do with them. And then 3 weeks later, no one knew how to beat them. And that's kind of where Strixhaven falls. It really is like a classic spell set, which is really appropriate for like the wizard school setting. But not to get into the flavor too much, I think there's just like a lot of really unique cards in Strixhaven that are looking for people to figure out how to use them. That's like if to get a little into like the Patrick Sullivan side of the world, that's kind of intentional. They like designed all the colleges in this set to be explicitly not the Ravnica guilds and do different things. And base them around like different interactions between the colors. Like the Ravnica sets are all about what the colors do together, like what white and red do similarly, and this is about what they do differently, and then putting that together. So it's kind of an interesting balance that's created a lot of cards that I am excited to see what happens with over the next few years.
I do think we all need to recalibrate our expectations when we get to a new spoiler season, because as you say, I think the exact cutoff is War of the Spark, which is coming up on 2 years ago now. And that has been a wild ride since then, where every single set, with, I guess, the exception of the Teferi themed core set, has just been an absolute earthquake for every constructed format. And we have been begging Wizards to let us off that wild ride for 2 years now. And now that that does seem to finally be happening, we're not quite sure how to handle it. And we're almost wanting to be somewhere between those two extremes. And if you compare Strixhaven to sets from before that time, let's say Ravnica Allegiance, the most recent set before War of the Spark, or Rivals of Ixalan, or anything, the average set in that time frame, I think Strixhaven would hold up pretty well, where there are a handful of cards which I expect to see in a lot of decks and to become staples of the modern format, and then a few around the fringes that maybe will make themselves known somewhere, and that's a decent haul in terms of the 2017, 2018 model for what a set should look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the better comparison, like you were saying, Rivals of Ixalan, like it's very clear that we're working on a power level reset to something manageable and reasonable. And I think that like Battle for Zendikar and Kaldheim did that with like 2 cards exceptions from them. Like most of those sets is pretty normal. And Strixhaven is finally coming back to this medium where like you can print cards that are interesting, but not like broken. So I think that we're coming into like a good station, a good substation of Magic, as opposed to like, just printing a bunch of Ixalans and hoping that everything washes away, which is how you get sets like Prophecy, which we're just not going to talk more about that one.
We can wait for the Receivables episode on that one. If they decide to finally get around to doing that once every other Magic set is taken care of. But Kaldheim is a natural comparison and a good one, I think, because in that set you have Tybalt and his trickery just causing total carnage in Modern for the better part of 2 weeks, I think it was. And one of those cards got banned, the other one was neutered via a rules change. And since then, you really have to look far and wide to see a Kaldheim card making an impact on Modern. So how do you shake that out? Is Kaldheim then a good set or a bad set on average? Those labels just don't seem worth applying anymore.
Yeah, it feels just like a very standard focused set. And I think that's something we might come around to in this set as opposed to Kaldheim, is that Kaldheim's themes are really disjointed. And one of the things that really adds to Modern is when you have a medium-sized theme in a set that lines up with a theme from an old set. So think about like Thalia's Lieutenant being one of the pieces of humans, and a lot of the Shadows over Innistrad humans adding to the Innistrad humans, adding to every other card with the type human, and that building up to something real. Whereas Kaldheim is just like some cards. There's like 2 cards on each theme and nothing really. Whereas in Strixhaven, you've got, very distinct themes across each of the colleges to build around.
And there are some themes that span all of those colors that can hook into established modern tactics or archetypes like Magecraft, for example, where, casting several spells in one sequence is, from Is It Phoenix to the Prowess decks to all the way back through Modern's history, you will find decks that want to do that. And so if there is a sufficiently pushed Magecraft card, you can expect it to find a home somewhere. Typically, gold cards tend to give you a better return on their rate because they're a little harder to cast than the average card. And so if there is a good gold card in, not sure what the official style guide is going to be here, but in Orzhov or in Golgari, let's say, maybe that's more likely to find a home than some of the on-theme cards in each of those individual houses.
Yeah, and also to kind of spoil some of the rankings a bit, one of the things that gold cards do the best is merge answers together so that one card answers a subset of things that had never really been covered before in a single card, which gives a new deck a bunch of metagame coverage. And then all of a sudden you have this question of, this is the whole fatal push thing that kind of unraveled Modern for a year, where suddenly decks without white could kill larger creatures, and then you had to figure out how anything that didn't have Death Shadow and Gurmag Angler could beat Death Shadow and Gurmag Angler. And so it's not quite that extreme right now, but you are going to see similar things happen with cards from Strixhaven because they answer a subset of things that like a single card in these colors hasn't answered before.
We have had some quite high-profile Modern events recently, from the Magic Online Championship Series through to the PTQs for the Strixhaven Championship, and then the showcase events and so on. And those give a good snapshot, as well as the usual league deck dumps and weekly challenge results. Those give a good snapshot of where the format is at the moment, and I think that's taking on a fairly clear picture. I don't expect that to change too much post Strixhaven, although there are a few cards at the top of our individual rankings that maybe could take issue with that. But that's how we're going to structure this discussion, is over on Star City Games, both of us, as well as several other writers, gave our Strixhaven first impressions, our top 5 predictions for the set. And interestingly, I think our rankings converge more than any 2 of the other rankings. So I don't know if that's good from a content perspective or bad, but I guess we'll see how that plays out.
I think no matter what, it means that we can look at Shaheen's rankings and both agree that we disagree with some of them.
And that's a great basis for content right there. So without further ado, let's leap into 5th place here in the top 5. And we'll get to some honorable mentions throughout the show here. But in 5th place, you put Expressive Iteration. And since the set has not actually released yet, we will be giving you a quick summary of the text on these cards. So we're not assuming you have the whole spoiler memorized yourself. So this is blue-red for a sorcery, and you look at the top 3 cards of your library, you put 1 into your hand, 1 on the bottom, and you exile 1 and you can play it this turn. So it's the kind of card draw combination with the red impulse mechanic that we've seen time and time again. And this is a hard one to assess at first glance, but you're clearly high enough on it to put it in your top 5 here.
Yeah, so I just want to get the first obvious thing, the less obvious thing out of the way. Like, this is a blue-red cantrip, but this is not the card that's going to save Is It Phoenix? So bursting all those bubbles out of the way, this card is really powerful. And so specifically the fact that it says play and not cast means that if you exile a land, you can play the land that turn. So it's really almost impossible to cast this card and not walk away with getting a 2-for-1. And usually when you're talking about cheap card draw spells like this, like, the role of those is often to give you 2 cards, one of which is like a land and then a spell, and then let you do more actions later in the game and just like keep doing a bunch of things. And then later, it's not even like always giving you a land and a spell. It's more likely than divination to give you 2 spells in the end of the game. So that's just this really powerful kind of efficient card draw spell. And we've seen, Night's Whisper occasionally shows up in this format, but in even older formats, Night's Whisper like shows up in Vintage all the time. So just like ways for people to accumulate card advantage at low rates are really great. And Modern has also kind of turned back towards a Snapcaster Mage format, where for a long time, Uro kind of did away with that. But you can like legitimately play Snapcaster Mage now. An Expressive Iteration is a really powerful spell to flashback with Snapcaster Mage. Just, layers and layers of more and more powerful card draw, and also the fact that it digs you further into your deck means that in these situations where like Snapcaster is amplifying a 1 or 2 of sideboard cards, like you have 2 surgical extractions and Snapcasters, you really have a bunch of surgicals, you're digging even further to find those cards. So your Snapcaster Mage deck is getting even better and better at answering a lot of the more niche aspects of the format without having these, hammer home, asynergistic cards. Like, you don't need a Leyline of the Void if you can just always find your surgical. This is kind of how like Legacy Delver works, where you have just these touches of the right interaction and not heavy-handed hate. And the deck that I'm kind of most excited for Expressive Iteration in is a throwback to like the Is It Phoenix blue-red days, the like Thing in the Ice blue moon decks. Just like another good cheap spell for those decks that are kind of historically known for getting a little clunky at times because Blood Moon plus Cryptic Command plus other 2-drops is just, this is a 2-drop, but it's not like a 2-drop. Like, it replaces itself and you just keep going with your life.
Yeah, I was wondering what home you had in mind for this, because it's easy to pigeonhole Snapcaster Mage as a reactive card, and typically the control shells that it appears in tend to have this more kind of draw-go playstyle, in which a 2-mana sorcery that places restrictions on when you cast that extra card doesn't seem to be an obvious fit. But if you can have more of a tap-out control style, where maybe you do have these sorcery speed haymakers like Blood Moon in your deck, maybe not Blood Moon itself, but something kind of analogous to that, then that does seem like a better home than, for example, these quite low to the ground Izzet Prowess decks, let's say, where you might think this can help kind of keep the cards flowing, and maybe it could be, like, if you think back to the early Companion era, you saw some of the Rakdos Prowess decks sideboarding Night's Whisper as a way to kind of outgrind the Lurrus Mirrors, and maybe Expressive Iteration could fill the same role here. But by and large, if you want to be casting a lot of cheap spells in a very narrow timing window, I don't think this is the card for you.
So of note, the Izzet Prowess decks these days do play Light Up the Stage, and that is a card that is like historically horrendous to draw in multiples, because it cascades into the situation where you're just like all light up the stages, no ways to activate them. And then when you get down to the point where you're like lightning bolt, you cast Light Up the Stage, you could just have cast Expressive Iteration for the same cost. And Expressive Iteration is like always cheaper pre-combat, so all your prowess stuff triggers.
It is far easier than it should be to strand the Izzet Prowess decks with like a Light Up the Stage and a Storming Entity, let's say, and their draw just kind of falls apart at that point. Whereas this card, the floor is high enough that you can always cast it for some amount of good use. You can, in theory, get the Spectacle cost earlier on with Lava Dart or Lightning Bolt or something like that, but by and large, if you are looking for a Prowess trigger, this will be better. I do wonder how much that difference between 1 and 2 mana plays into that decision, though, where, you know, for a deck which is trying to unload its hand and get on the board quickly and close the game out as fast as possible, that seems like a bigger difference than it would be in some other context.
I think that part of the equation is that if you could play 5 Light Up the Stages without having the draw 5 Light Up the Stages problem, you might want to do that. So this card might break you out of that and let you, you play like 3 of one, 2 of the other, and you end up in this spot where you're not like overloaded on 2-drops, but you're not overloaded on Spectacle cards, and you can actually find some balance while maximizing the number of this similar effect you get to play.
Yeah, it may not be an either-or kind of thing, where if you get paired against some kind of boomer Jund deck that was 95% legal in 2015 and it's running a few Modern Horizons cards just to pretend it's still living in this in this millennium, then maybe having a pile of Light Up the Stages plus Expressive Iterations is actually the best way to go toe-to-toe on a grindy axis with them in post-cyborg games.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about Lava Dart decks. Can you tell me about your 5th place pick, Elite Spellbinder? That's the Paulo Vitor Damarosa's World Championship face card, 2 and a white for a 3/1 flyer. And when it enters the battlefield, you look at your opponent's hand, exile one of the cards, and it makes that card cost 2 more to cast. They can cast from exile, but notably, like there's no cap on when that effect ends. So it's not like Skyclave Apparition where if your 3/1 flyer dies, they get the card back or they get a token. No, the card's just like hanging out there, costs 2 more forever. And it's also a human cleric. Those are kind of my big issue against it. Is it's just like another 3/1 flyer that gets lava darted. So what are you excited about by this card in the format?
Well, I'm not excited about getting paired against Lava Dart with this, as you say, and I expect to be getting paired against a lot of Lava Darts. Not to tip where this list may be going and what might be higher up here, but this card may have to wait for its time to shine, or maybe it's only going to be a niche sideboard card. But what intrigues me here is that this card adds a new dimension to white that we've really never seen before, and white sorely needed some new design space anyway, and this is an effect which I know Paolo's favorite Magic card is Vendilion Clique, so it's nice for him to be immortalized on a card which is not quite Vendilion Clique. That one is an all-timer, but it's roughly in the same space, and I think you could argue that the kind of white creature decks that this might naturally go in need that kind of effect much more than these kind of disruptive blue tempo decks, which love to have Vendilion Clique, but can get away without it, and often have for the past few years. You don't see that card as much anymore.
Yeah. So I guess thinking a little more, this card is, it's good with Flicker Wisp, right? You get to flicker it in and out and keep taking cards from their hand. But I think that maybe the thing that it kind of ties together is another card that I've liked in these shells, Glasspool Mimic. So one of the traditional issues with these white creature decks is that if you don't have an Ether Vial on turn 1, your deck is just like a bunch of like mediocre 2s and a pile of 3s, and it's really hard to like produce multiple actions in a single turn. So one of the things that you end up doing towards the mid game that was always really good was you could, play a Glasspool Mimic as the land side on turn 1, and then you'd have like a 3-drop, and then you could like Flicker Wisp, get the Glasspool Mimic, copy your Flicker Wisp, do a bunch of stuff. But like if you just draw a Glasspool Mimic, copying this card is great, and it's also like a good way to end that chain and get another effect out of it. So that's kind of interesting.
I know Aspiring Spike, who is one of the most popular Magic streamers at this point, and also I would say the main driver by now of innovation in Modern, at least on Magic Online, is a really big fan of that interaction, going so far as to splice it into this infinite combo deck, where you go Glassball Mimic into Aureoc Champion into your Felidar Guardian, which has a similar effect to Flicker Wisp, but returns it immediately, so you can blink your whatever the land side of Glassball Mimic is, have it come back in as the Mimic, which copies the Guardian. They keep blinking each other, you gain infinite life, and so there are a bunch of neat interactions you can do in that space. The thing that holds me back on Elite Spellbinder is those white creature decks are already overloaded with 3-drops. So if you look at the Helio Company decks, for example, you already have a core of your deck is 3-drops, and it's quite difficult to fit in anymore. This doesn't have the second pip to count towards White Devotion. So maybe it's a unique sideboard tool there, but you could testify to that more than I could, I think. And then the white Taxes decks, the Thalia, Leonine Arbiter shells, again, you already want your Flicker Wisps and your Skyclave Apparitions, and there's already competition with 3-drop equipment, the 3-mana Thalia, a bunch of other cards which have been competing for those slots, and I don't know if Spellbinder slots into those as seamlessly as it might appear at first.
So I guess to loop back to the green-white, Selesnya, Heliod, Spike Feeder Company deck, I think that Elite Spellbinder might serve a pretty good purpose there. So one of the things that has been holding that deck back recently in the metagame, or I don't know, really holding it back is kind of an overstatement. One of the only things that's been competing with it and like putting up top results besides it are the big mana decks, the Urza's Towers and the Primeval Titans of the world. And Elite Spellbinder gives you a pretty good weapon against those, and importantly against Primeval Titan, you can't Ranger Captain of Eos. So you can Ranger Captain of Eos and cut your opponent off a turn for like Karn, Liberated, or Ugin the Spirit Dragon, or whatever Tron card your opponent's going to throw down that matters. Like, if they throw down Reality Smasher, who cares? You'll move on with your life. But Primeval Titan is a creature. You can't Ranger Captain of Eos sacrifice to stop that. Elite Spellbinder buys you a decent amount of time against that card. So I think that that's the thing that Elite Spellbinder does the best in Modern, if anything, is handle Primeval Titans. Because you often end up in spots against Primeval Titans where you get this kind of fork where you're like, well, maybe I can cut their mana, or I can maybe cut a Titan off. But if they have 2 Titans, or if they have 2 mana ramp spells, everything falls apart. And you just look at their hand and you're like, oh, I'm gonna cut off your Primeval Titan because you don't have a second one, or I'm going to land this a turn early and cut off your Dryad of the Elysian Grove because you have 2 Titans. I can't stop that. But if you can't play Dryad, it's going to take you 5 turns to get there or whatever. So, yeah.
And I think Spellbinder gives you a kind of coverage that you didn't have before, where if your opponent is playing some deck that's trying to play to the board, some other creature strategy, for example, then your main plan of gumming up the board and gaining infinite life already is likely to trump whatever they're doing. And then also, Skyclave Apparition is one of the best cards ever printed at just picking off something specific that your opponent needs to keep on the battlefield. Whereas Spellbinder, if your opponent is waiting to cast some 7-drop Planeswalker way ahead of schedule, then you can't Apparition that. You can't really do much else about it either, but you can Spellbinder it. And even just doing that once, delaying it for maybe just a turn, could be enough to swing that race in your favor.
Yeah, and it also fits into the Selesnya Company's kind of one of the big upsides of that deck, especially against the Juns of the world, is that every single creature you cast is a pseudo spellskite. So if you don't know exactly the details of that combo, basically, if you have a Heliod and a Spike Feeder, if you gain a life and you put another counter on the Spike Feeder, you can activate it again in response to them killing it and just like go off on the stack on top of it. So basically, if you have an Auriok champion, your opponent has to kill the Spike Feeder in response to the game life trigger. If you have a Scavenging Ooze, you could pay a mana. And so like you have all these like utility cards that just like accidentally give your deck this extra layering of like, well, you have to kill this, otherwise you have to spend 2 kill spells to kill the Spike Feeder. And this would just be another one of those. So that kind of fits really well.
The other home that is less well established, but I think might have a place for this card, is some kind of dedicated Blink deck, whether it's Soul Herder based or with Ephemerate or something else, where if you can Spellbinder their removal spell, not to stop them from getting a card back in the Kite Sail Freebooter sense, where often you felt priced into taking the removal spell because otherwise your Freebooter would just die and they would get their relevant card back. This time around, if you take their removal spell, just to keep the Spellbinder for a narrow window, and then you blink it once, you blink it again, suddenly their whole hand costs at least 2 more, and they might just not be able to participate in the game meaningfully. If maybe you're constraining their mana on some other axis, or you're applying pressure. If the first Spellbinder is good, the second and third Spellbinder triggers at least are likely to be even better.
Yeah, that's kind of the stacks effect, where if the first Sphere of Resistance makes it hard for them to play, oh boy, the second one, they're just done.
So, Sphere of Resistance, not the most fun Magic card, but a good note to take a break on shortly before we move on to something which might have more people going bananas. Class is now in session at the prestigious Strixhaven School of Mages, the most elite university in the multiverse, featuring 5 colleges battling it out with their own takes on magic. You can learn from the best professors and explore Strixhaven's huge library for yourself. Pre-order your Strixhaven sealed products now at starcitygames.com/previews.
If you're looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier before with all the options starcitygames.com offers. We've got a 30% store credit bonus, the fastest turnaround time in the industry, and 4 easy ways to sell to us. Check out our buy list at starcitygames.com/sell. Ship your cards to us with our ship and sell program, or you can come to us at the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia, and sit down for one of those old 2019 style feels of selling your cards. Or if you have over 500,000 cards or own a store and want to move some of your bulk, we can come to you. And the region for that, they got this region listed on the site. Again, that's starcitygames.com/sell. It is quite a large region. You know, Kentucky, New Jersey, those states are not near each other. So they really do mean we will come to you. So if you want to sell your cards, check out starcitygames.com/sell and figure out the nicest, easiest option for you, because, like I said, starcitygames.com is really making it easier than it's ever been before to sell your Magic the Gathering cards.
And we're back. So for the 4th spot on our rankings here, I went for Rip Apart. So this is an enhanced Abrade, basically. This is white and red for a sorcery where you can deal 3 to a creature, you can destroy an artifact or an enchantment, or I must be missing a 4th mode in here somewhere, right?
Deal 3 to a Planeswalker, which I don't...
deal 3 to a... Okay.
Yeah. What Planeswalkers in Modern have 3 loyalty?
I do actually wonder if you did a power ranking of those 4 modes where they would all stack up compared to each other, but this is the kind of card where you don't want it for any one use in particular, and any of these single uses is already well covered by other cards in the format, but that kind of flexibility in the same package is unique and might be enough to, for example, give a combo deck that doesn't know what hate it's going to be facing a good form of counterplay against all of it at the same time.
Yeah, I'm lower on this card. The fact that it's a sorcery and not an instant is kind of unexciting to me. I think maybe it's better if if you care about like Meddling Mage or Rest in Peace. That's kind of pretty good coverage against the Azorius decks, for example, because they could just have either for whatever reason. The one thing I did kind of like about this is that the fact that it costs white-red instead of, like white-black or white-green is kind of relevant, because one of the most important cards to disenchant in Modern is Blood Moon, and adding a red mana to your spell's cost instead of a colorless when your opponent has a Blood Moon is just a wash. It's all the same.
It's also a nice hedge against Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon at the same time out of some of those decks, in case you care about that. I will say, even though this card is on my list and not on yours, I do think people will put this in too many decks just because, well, it probably will do something, right? And I think if you include a card like this, that versatility can be a mirage sometimes, and you need to have a good reason for actively including this card as opposed to, well, maybe I can find some kind of use for it.
Yeah, there's like a relatively low number of braids in the format even these days, at least from what I've seen. And I think that some of that has to do with a lot of the reason you saw a lot of the effects like Abrade and Disenchant are the play I mentioned before with Snapcaster Mage, where, when you can Abrade 2 to 3 times in a game because you just have a couple copies, that's great. But just one Abrade might not cut it. And Rip Apart probably pairs with Snapcaster Mage in a similar way, where if you have Snapcaster Mage, it lets you leverage whichever mode is great on the card. And if you don't, it's kind of just like a one-shot spell where maybe like you need something a little bit more hard-hitting to carry through.
And I think the kind of Jeskai deck that wants Snapcaster Mage and can play Rip Apart often is going to prioritize instant speed interaction over sorceries if it has the chance to choose. And it is rather unfortunate, as I'm sure we'll keep coming back to, that the best deck in Modern, I think, quite firmly at this point, is based around a namesake enchantment, which is indestructible. So some of this, the versatility on this card comes with some strict qualifications attached to it. So I think this will show up in sideboards, maybe a little more than it should, but when it is good, it is the best card for the job, or one of them. And so in a set which I think is maybe a little shallow in terms of its overall impact, this was still enough to crack my top 5, but maybe it should not have been. I am starting to rethink that.
Well, my 4th place is also kind of a narrow utility sideboard card as well, so I don't know if I did much better on this slot. I put in Test of Talents. This is 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target instant or sorcery spell, and then you unmoored ego that card. So you search their deck, their hand, their graveyard for any number of copies of that, and then if you take any of them from their hand, they get to replace them with a card. So you don't get like these blowout bonus card advantage things where like you just counter an instant and then also him to Torok them. But you do just get to take that card out of their deck completely. And I think that that's like a pretty crushing effect in Modern. Not only have there historically been a bunch of combo decks where just like if you took a card out of their deck, they would not function. Even recently that's been the case. There have been the blue Living End decks floating around that are just, trying to cast violent outbursts on their opponent's turn, cascade into Living End, and then Force of Negation. One of the ways that deck actually tries to beat counterspells is having like 3 to 4 Living Ends in its deck. So it like starts a fight on its opponent's turn and then just untaps and fires off another one. And there's like, if there's just not another one in its deck, it's just done. That's it. That's a wrap. But I think that Test of Talents has applications in matchups that aren't combo as well. Like people board in, it's a little different because there's planeswalkers that this can't counter. But if you're just firing this off at like your opponent's cryptic commands in a pseudo mirror or something similar, you can actually cut off a lot of their interaction with a single counterspell. And like in these long control mirrors, there's this really additive effect of just like taking functional cards out of their deck. They actually get to this point where like the bad deck thinning just gets to them.
Yeah, and you saw this dynamic in some of the blue mirrors in the Uro days, where if you could disable all of their force of negation somehow, then it was really hard for the opponent to dictate the pacing of the game because they could never really tap out on their turn. But then if they were just having to pass up with all their mana, they couldn't meaningfully advance their own position either. And so, usually that would be surgical extraction in those cases. But in this case, if you have a card which is just generically good as Dispel Plus, basically, sometimes that plus is really meaningful as the game goes along. The reason I think I was lower on this card was those combo decks based around a single namesake spell have mostly been kicked out of the format by accident at this point, where, Gorya's Vengeance used to be a somewhat fringe play in the format, but the Faithless Looting ban was not intended for it, but managed to drag it down with it, or Simeon Spirit Guide getting axed caused whales to go up from ad nauseum players across the world who maybe are finally being forced to confront the reality of how good their deck was in Modern. But either way, those types of deck just don't really seem to be players in the format anymore. And so There's actually another card in the set, Solve the Equation, which is 2 and a blue, search for an instant or sorcery and put it into your hand. And that's a kind of card that goes very neatly in that kind of deck. And so that card and Test of Talents may single swim together, where if one of them is good, it suggests the other one is likely to be good, and vice versa. So at the moment, I don't think either one is going to make a dent, unfortunately. But this is a good one to have in your back pocket if Scape Shift, or if a deck around that model pops back up again.
Yeah, so regarding Solve the Equation, I'm kind of cooler on that. I'm coming around to the idea that like you would have to literally put Demonic Tutor into Modern or even like Standard for people to play with it. Like that jump to the 3rd mana, like you have access to Wishclaw Talisman and you can pay that in installments and you can get anything, and people just don't even do that. So I'm cooler on the idea of Solve the Equation popping up unless there's like a dedicated like non-black combo deck. But yeah, it is tough for Test of Talents. It would have been good in Modern at older points. And maybe some of this is also that it and Force Negation just do the same job, but Force Negation does it better because it doesn't cost mana. Like you just can't pay a bunch of mana for Past in Flames when your opponent can just Force Negation it, and you're like, oh shucks, there goes all my cards. Well, we'll try again in 7 turns. What's the worst that happens? You draw another. Oh well.
Yeah.
Who saw that coming?
And Gift Storm is, I think, the only home that jumps to mind for Solve the Equation at this point as well. So this kind of card can also be a victim of its own success, where you look at sideboards and no one has Test of Talents, and that's because cards like Test of Talents have driven out their prey from the format, where you just can't justify playing cards like that or building decks based around those cards if these really effective countermeasures are that popular. So these do ebb and flow in a somewhat cyclical way, I think, but I don't know if we're at that point in the cycle where a card like this is going to make a dent. But moving on to our number 3 slot, both of us actually had this card in the same place, and this also cracked into most other people's lists as well. I think universal agreement that this card is going to be a player. That's Vanishing Verse. So this is white and a black for an instant, which is exile target monocolored permanent. So it's an upgraded ultimate price, essentially. And when we spoke about the most important card in the format, or one of them being an indestructible enchantment, this is a unicorn. This is the card that actually cleanly answers that, and by itself, that would be enough to get it a top 5 slot for this set, I think. But it's so versatile that you can justify putting that card in your deck with the expectation of hitting something and not being narrowly targeted at any one card or strategy.
Yeah, I think the 2 big hurdle, like this card kills a lot of stuff and it just gets it gone. Like every card in Prowess, it kills Death Shadow, it kills Scourge of the Skyclaves, it kills Tarmogoyf. Like it's almost easier to talk about the 2 parts of the card that make, like, you might not want to put white and black mana into your deck, but I think that's like an easy hurdle to clear in Modern, especially if this is pushing towards, more interactive decks. White and black are historically the Lingering Souls colors. Whenever you get into interactive mirror matches in Modern, people start to look at Lingering Souls, especially if you can't kill people that fast with Death Shadows. So it's easier to start looking at this in the context of like, what doesn't it kill? So I threw together like a little bit of a list. It doesn't kill a lot of Planeswalkers. The playable Planeswalkers are like Wrenn and Six and Teferis and Karns. So that's like a bit of a solvable problem for it, I feel like. It doesn't kill the Worldway creature lands, so Raging Ravine and Celestial Colonnade, which are probably going to pop up if you start having Vanishing Verse mirrors. Someone's going to show up with some amount of those creature lands because they're really good in more mid-rangey battles. The one that was interesting to me was that it didn't kill Lurrus of the Dream Den. So even if you exile the things that they're casting, all their Swift Spears and Death Shadows, you're still going to need something else for the Lurrus. And just kind of going through this list, I think that the end situation for Vanishing Verse is probably that you end up with like 2 of them in your deck, but it covers Heliod and gives you this kind of broad coverage. And then you just kind of have to play your game such that you don't spew, your Fatal Push or your Terminate or your Assassin's Trophy on something you could just Vanishing Verse instead, or vice versa. You just have to kind of know the format, use the right removal spell on the right thing. And I guess you can't say play this in Jund because it's white-black and not, red, black, or green. So maybe that's just an upside. You can just get people away from their Bloodbraid Elves or whatever.
Yeah, there was an explicit trend in design in the mid 2010s, around like the 2014, 2015 point of making sure that removal was at most one of, it was either conditional or it was expensive, basically. So if you were paying 2 mana to answer a 2 mana threat, you probably couldn't pay 2 mana to answer every 2 mana threat. You could pay 3 mana or 4 mana or have some other cost attached to it. But you didn't have like a Swords to Plowshares equivalent or something which just cleanly answered everything you wanted it to answer. And there are enough of those conditional removal spells now that you have this patchwork of removal where you can cover everything in quite a few different ways, but you have to think carefully about what the overlap is between your removal, what the gaps are that you need to address elsewhere in your deck building. And the most popular control shell now in Modern is Esper Control, which has been doing very well in the recent weekend challenges. And that's a kind of deck you can very easily see adopting Vanishing Verse, where it pairs very well with Snapcaster Mage as an instant. And between Vanishing Verse, Archmage's Charm, Kaya's Guile, Sweepers, Fatal Push, and so on, you can kill anything. It's just a question of when and how and making sure you line up your removal against the right things. So killing Heliod is the big thing, but being able to kill a lot of other things at the same time is what pushes this from a narrow answer into the kind of thing you can justify main decking.
Yeah, I do think there is one kind of exploit to this card that's worth noting. So we're talking about this card pushing down Heliod. We had mentioned that one of the things that pushed down the Selesnya Company deck before was the big mana decks. And this card is like really bad against the big mana decks. It doesn't kill Amulet of Vigor. It doesn't kill anything in Tron. Like Tron just doesn't contain cards that die to this. So I think that might be something that kind of, this gets, even if this alone isn't enough to take care of the Heliod decks and push them off the top of the metagame, it gets the ball rolling in other ways. There's this kind of second order effect that makes decks that are good against those even better. And you can start seeing metagames where the Heliod deck is no longer just the literal best deck in the format that everyone is kind of trying to beat and kind of hoping they don't play against.
Modern has so much of this historical baggage built into it where some odd design or templating choices from years ago end up having these ramifications years later. And so the unique wording on the Theros gods in the original Theros block, none of which really have seen any lasting play in Modern, which was replicated to give the new Theros gods the same feel, has ended up making Heliod curiously invincible against a lot of decks where it's a creature when you need it to be for your own collected companies or against their force negations, but it's also a non-creature when you're facing down a pile of removal spells and you need to find a way to thread the needle through it. So finally having cards that actually do answer that well and aren't exactly Deicide, for example, is a nice addition to the format and a good way to kind of keep that deck in check, I think.
Yeah. I'm hoping to see some churn in the metagame because the Heliod deck has really been on top for at least since the Uro ban. It was one of the top decks before that. And it's not a bad deck to have at the top of your metagame. It's a green and white creature deck that's also like a format-specific combo deck and has like some cards that have some real, Auriok Champion is a card with intersectional appeal across a lot of Magic players. And the fact that it's seeing play in Modern in a lot of top decks is like a pretty good thing for the format, I think. But it would be nice for it to, kind of take a turn around the metagame and then come back later.
We are already risking our job security here by calling this Green-White Heliod instead of Selesnya Company, but I'm taking a firm stance on that. I'm willing to die on that hill. But all of the cards that we've analyzed so far are either these fringe role players or maybe they're marginal improvements to certain strategies. The cards that both of us had in differing orders in number 1 and number 2, I think are poised to redefine Modern going forward. And we'll get to exactly what those are after a short break.
Find your way to the Strixhaven Championships with the SCG Tour online. Compete on Arena against other players for cash prizes. Tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Qualifier Weekend invitations, and at the top of the heap, Strixhaven Championship invitations. And let's rewind for a second. I did say MTG Arena Qualifier Weekend invitations. Even if you don't take down the whole thing, you could do well enough that you could spend the end of the month watching your Mythic ranking spiral down into the percents and not having to worry about it because you already earned your MTG Arena Qualifier Weekend invitation via the SCG Tour online. Visit scgtouronline.starcitygames.com for the upcoming schedule. Take a look at the upcoming formats and figure out when you want to take your shot at qualifying for the Strixhaven Championship with the SCG Tour Online. Remember, your road to the Strixhaven Championship begins with the SCG Tour Online.
All right, so let's dive into the cards which I had no doubt about placing at the top of my list. The only question is which one was first and which one was second. It looks like you were roughly on the same page too. I was honestly surprised that not many other people shared our stances on this. And in some cases, one of these cards was nowhere to be seen on other lists, which I think is, maybe it's them wanting it to be true and trying to manifest it through their predictions, but otherwise it's kind of baffling to me.
Yeah, I think that one of these cards is kind of just like really obviously like flashy and new. And like you said, I think the other one is just the kind of card that no one wants to be good. Like if this card is good, it's going to be negative fun for everyone involved. And
let's clear that one off the slate right now then. So Thrilling Discovery, which a perfectly ironic title given that no one was thrilled to discover this in the spoiler, other than maybe Sodek. So this is red and a white for a sorcery. You gain 2 life, and then you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw 3 cards. So this is Cathartic Reunion with a nice little life gain buffer at the start, but crucially, the discarding here is not part of the cost. So that can actually be a downside if you don't expect your Cathartic Reunion to resolve, but you really want to have those cards in your graveyard. But otherwise, this lets you jam your enablers into disruption much more easily without just throwing resources into the void. And even beyond that, and its own play patterns, just having access to 8 copies of Cathartic Reunion is the biggest boost that Dredge has got in a long time. I guess Ox of Agonis is vying for that title too, but either way, the fact that Dredge now has all of these new toys, as people like to say, that's a scary omen for where the format is going.
Yeah, so I think that the big thing is, I don't know how many people played Dredge. There's like a very specific window where the London my timeline on this is a little fuzzy because I played Modern for 2 Mythic Championships. That was the branding at the time, right? Mythic Championships with the London Mulligan before the London Mulligan was publicly rolled out for everyone else. So, and for the second of those, it was already Hogak era, so it was always a mess. So I think very specifically, you would have had to have play tested for Mythic Championship London to really have this feeling for what has happened to Dredge with the London Mulligan and like with access to the right number of this kind of effect. So one of the things that we found in testing for that event was that you could do some really, this was back in the Faithless Looting era, but one of the things that people could do against Dredge is they could mull to their 4 of Leyline of the Void really reliably, but Dredge could just mull right on back, and you'd end up in these spots where both players had 4 cards, but Dredge's 4 cards were Thrilling Discovery, Cathartic Reunion, Nature's Claim, Land, Dredger. And if your opponent didn't have the Leyline because they finally just had to stop on a functional 4, you could just move on with your life, cast your single enabler, and that would just churn away the whole game. And it was easier with Faithless Looting because you could get away with 1 landers and do this. But once they banned Faithless Looting, you just couldn't functionally assemble 4 or 5 card hands that had a disenchant in them. So what Thrilling Discovery offers is the ability to get those low card hands back and have these games where even if your opponent has the hate card, you're just going to have the removal spell for it. If they don't have the hate card, you're just going to go right on off through them. And it's kind of the, Ox of Agonis, as you said, adds to this because it gives you the back half of Faithless Looting where you fire your first spell, but maybe you have to slow Dredge after. No, your deck's just going to go in the graveyard and it's going to be over. So I think that Dredge at that tournament didn't do great, but it was super, super scary and the thing that everyone was trying to beat. And this is the kind of thing where I can see this card, even if every event is not being won by Dredge, every event is going to be won by a deck with a vintage number of Dredge hate cards in the sideboard. For those of you who haven't played or looked at that format, we're talking about, the Bazaar of Baghdad Dredge deck, and people are hacking usually 6 to 8 anti-graveyard cards or anti-Dredge cards.
And that dynamic has been in place for close to 15 years now, ever since these refined Dredge decks appeared on the scene. And the perfect example was Pro Tour Valencia back in 2007, but the one that almost got flooded out, and then they had to bail it out at the last minute, I guess literally as well as metaphorically. But if you look at the deck list from that event, it's quite hard to piece together what's going on, because every deck has, a main deck Tormod's Crypt to go with their Trinket Mages or Talaria West, or they have 4 Leyline of the Void in their sideboard and a bunch of other cards that are good against graveyard combo decks. And then you look down the top 16, top 32 decks, there is not a single graveyard combo deck. And that's because the known information going into that tournament was, we're not quite sure what is good, but we know that Dredge post Future Sight is an abomination that will run us over unless we take measures against it. And so people, I wouldn't say over-prepared, I think they rationally prepared, but they prepared enough to keep Dredge down, and yet you don't get a whole picture of where that format was going just by looking at that one result, because as you say, you end in this call and response cycle where if people aren't playing enough hate, Dredge is the deck to play for the weekend. And if they are, okay, you put your Shriek Horns away and get out the Death Shadows again, for example. And I don't think that's a healthy dynamic for a format to fall into. Modern has been there in the past, and I'm kind of scared it might end up there again.
Yeah, I had to pull up this, top 8 just to look at some of the stuff going on, because I forgot all the lists. Because that Pro Tour was just such a weird one at the time. There's a main deck Extirpate in one of these decks. There's just an Extirpate in like this black-green normal cards deck. It is bad. I honestly, at this point, I hate to say things like this, but I think that if we just didn't have Stinkweed Imp and Golgari Thug in the format, we might be better off. Give people their faithless looting, get rid of the worst offender, and see how things fall.
Do we have to go as far as Golgari Thug, who never laid a hand on anyone? But yeah, maybe that's that you have to take such a drastic measure just to be sure, right? Because you do not want to end up in the somewhat analogous Hogak problem, right? Where you ban what you think is the offensive card and you leave the true offenders in the format, and then you're just back in the same problem again. You have to do yet another round of bannings, and the optics of it are just terrible, especially coming after a banning round in which we removed 5 cards from the format and both, destroyed recent menaces as well as upending pillars of the format for years. I think they want to take some time off and give the ban list some time to breathe.
Yeah, and I do think any call for a ban is really preemptive. The other thing that did change since the event I was talking about in London was the printing of Modern Horizons, and specifically Force Negation is another very powerful tool in kind of breaking up those setups I was talking about. It's hard you can't run a low card count game against Force Negation, both because it will counter the card that kills Leyline of the Void, depending on timing, and it will counter your, refill attempt or whatever. It just ends really badly. So I think that a lot of the fair decks, and this was something, there was this very, very microscopic span where the format existed in this state with, Modern Horizons and War of the Spark, but not, quite Hogak or whatever. I think that was between I'm trying to even remember that. It might have actually just been in the 2 weeks where Hogak was banned, but it wasn't really banned and people just didn't play it. But Dredge was definitely held in check by Force Negation at that point. And Narset, Partner of Veils. So there might be the right kind of things to help Modern from devolving into this graveyard hate sideboard thing, but I think that people will have to learn the hard way how to beat Dredge, and it is tougher than it looks right now.
I do wonder if Heliod then becomes a hero that we need and maybe deserve, because I think that deck lines up well naturally against Dredge, and then right now most Heliod decks don't have a reason to care about hating on graveyards, but if they want to, then they can very easily support Rest in Peace, Wheel of Sun and Moon, Scavenging Ooze as just a good fair card that ties into their plan while also incidentally hating on Dredge. So it seems like it may be, this issue may be somewhat addressed already just by the fact that Heliod is already the best deck and already keeping some of these decks in line.
Yeah, that's very fair. And again, the things that Heliod sort of loses to, also things that Dredge is not the biggest fan of playing against, like Amulet Titan. I don't know if I've ever... Dredge versus Amulet Titan is not a good matchup. not only is Amulet Titan just this combo deck that overwhelms Dredge, they just have Bojuka Bog in their deck. Like, have you ever just like had the Amulet opponent just? I guess you were probably on the Amulet side more than the Dredge side, but like, there's just a Bojuka Bog and a Sakura Tribe Scout and a bounced land, and your opponent's deck is just non-functional. It's like, oh, at any time they can Tormod's Crypt me, and it has buyback. Oh no.
I've had some nanny bugs in my time, that's for sure. But I worry that Dredge is speeding up to the point where you do actually have to pay some kind of respect to it. And this is a theme that we'll see repeated in our analysis of the number 1 card, I think. But when these linear decks become, that they take this leap forward and they become even just half a turn faster, then a lot of the assumptions you can make of what are good matchups, what are bad matchups, suddenly can be flipped before you even realize it. So it may be that, yeah, Amulet is still the foil if Dredge becomes big, but you do actually have to run maybe some relics or cages or something in your sideboard. You can't just put your 1 Bojuka Bog to start out your lands column on your deck list and write the matchup off.
Yeah, and you were saying the number 1 card. That card is going to be a problem for Amulet. That card that you had at number 1 and I had at number 2 is Clever Lumamancer. This is the white 0-1 with Magecraft +2/+2. So you might kind of think this is Step Links, which is a card that has like historically underperformed whenever anyone has put it in a deck, except for Paul Rietzel. But casting spells is a little different than casting lands. Like, even when you Foothills and crack it, like, that doesn't draw you another Wooded Foothills. It's just like the land. But when you opt into another opt, it just goes off forever.
Yeah, and we already have an entire family of aggressive decks at the top tier of Modern, which rely on that play pattern of casting several spells in the same turn, casting Lava Dart, flashing it back for free, following up with a third spell, and you're dead before you know it. And if you've ever played with or against those decks, there is a massive difference between certainly the draws where they have a 1-drop versus not having a 1-drop, but also the draws where they have 1-drop, they have a 1-drop versus having several 1-drops, which often, they can easily kill you on turn 3 in those scenarios. And with the addition of Clever Lumamancer, this hypothetical Boros Prowess deck, you have 12 good 1-drops with Prowess Plus, essentially, that you can string together these very fast kills with, even if you're not leaning into this card hard with stuff like Team of Battle Rage or something, which you can do now. And I wonder if you're meant to start from a position of, let's say, 12 1-drops, 4 Kiln Fiend, a bunch of Crash Throughs or Team of Battle Rages, and 4 Mutagenic Growth, lean really hard on the aggro combo aspect, or if you take the Prowess deck that Patrick Sullivan posted for the What We Play a few months ago, you upgrade the Abbot of Keral Keeps or whatever, which is pretty mopey, to Lumomancers, and now you have a proven fast deck that just got at least half a turn faster.
Yeah, and white is one of the colors in Lurrus of the Dream Den, so you get to preserve that through the swap, which is really huge, even if you don't necessarily want to preserve Mishra's Bauble. Crash Through, a Ryan Overture favorite, is going to probably be really crucial in these decks. The trample on that card is a big deal for Clever Lumamancer. The one thing I'm glad that neither of us has stated as one of our primary reasons to play this card is Ground Rift. Listen, Niv Magus Elemental has never treated anyone well. And I think that the kind of lesson of Magecraft is that if you are creating enough storm copies of something to make the Magecraft pile on relevant, you should have just won the game. Like, I don't think that, I guess, if you Ground Rift and it's 3-ish, that's kind of different. If you were Lightning Bolt, you Mutagenic Growth this, cast Ground Rift, that might be enough of an amplifier. It's +4 effectively because you get the 2 bonus storm copies instead of just whatever you would cast. That is kind of the range where it starts battering. But if you just cast a good spell, if you just cast a Lava Dart, that's basically a Ground Rift, right? And then you just don't have to have Ground Rift in your deck.
I have spent too much time already trying to build these equations around Haze of Rage where, okay, so if I have a Lumamancer and a Haze of Rage, then it's 2n+1, and then if I have 2 Lumamancers, and it's easy to get lost in the sauce with that kind of thing. And I do wonder if the clause on Magecraft where it triggers off copying a spell, I think is good from a design standpoint insofar as intuitively that's how you think the prowess mechanic should work. But when it comes to evaluating the card, I think it leads people down these rabbit holes of, okay, I'm going to dust off my ground rifts and my Magus Elementals, and what obscure storm card can I pair with this, versus just the proven play pattern we know of. Okay, lava dart that, lava dart you, lightning bolt you, and oh look, you're dead on turn 3, and I only had to use 3 or 4 cards to do that, and I have redundancy on all of those, so why are you not playing this deck as well? Which I think will be an increasingly common question.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if there's like some good white cantrip that we've forgotten about. And this should be like a really easy search to run because you don't want anything that costs more than 1 mana. But we think about all the red cards. There just hasn't been a reason to run white ones outside of like. There just really hasn't. There's just been, in Pioneer, you've had to do it because of Boros Charm being effective. But this kind of like, there are going to be add-on effects of what this card does to these decks that we kind of haven't figured out yet. And I'm interested to see what those are.
I do think it matters that this color combination has its own canopy land in Sunbait Canyon, which traditionally has been a crucial flood insurance for these Paras decks. And even the allied color combinations, red-black, red-green, have played the off-color canopy lands just to have that effect. But having that be a good dual land and also this crucial flood insurance is a really nice pickup as well. Worth noting, too, that having a white creature means you don't have your entire ground team brickwalled by Aureoch Champion anymore, or other things that hate on red creatures, which, Ether Gust is a common sideboard card in the format. Celestial Purge pops up from time to time, and if you have these cards which seem universal on the face of it, but they have this blind spot in the form of Lumamancer, you can very easily just die to the wrong 1-drop if they happen to draw it.
Yeah, and I think you kind of made a point that these decks are going to fold in on themselves once they have an excuse to play the mana for Core Firewalker. Like, do you really want to be the person showing up to a Prowess Mirror without Core Firewalker if you could just have Core Firewalker instead?
Right, so if this card was green somehow, or black or something, then maybe this conversation would take a different turn. But as it is, there's already a decent incentive pushing you in that direction regardless. And so this is just the cherry on top of that. I do wonder if between us, our number 1 and number 2 cards are a card that boosts Dredge into the Transphere and a card that makes Prowess even scarier. Traditionally, Dredge, at least in the past few months, has been a metagame response to exploit Prowess when that deck has been popular, because you get a bunch of incidental life gain via Creeping Chill, you're gumming up the ground with a bunch of price amalgams and so on, and you can build towards, Conflagrate endgame that they can't do much about, or so you are pretty well set up against all but their fastest draws. When both decks are getting that much better, I don't know if that matchup starts to flip at all, or if, like, let's say we only had Lumamancer, if that would move the needle towards Prowess, but now Thrilling Discovery moves it back at the same time. So I think the contest between those two decks will be an increasing part of the format too.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder if the fact that Lumamancer is +2 a spell starts letting you get away with nonsense like just putting Surgical Extraction in your deck. So if Dredge becomes a problem, you can just take care of it right then. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that that Lumamancer is just like head and shoulders just this massive prowess upgrade, because there's a few like interesting green prowess tools in this set. Charge Through, which is green. Target creature gets trampled until end of turn, draw a card, which, there's Crash Through already, but like doubling up on that potentially is interesting. And Dragon's Guard Elite, that's the 1 in a green that gets counters on Magecraft 2/2. And then technically you can pay 6 mana to double the counters, but I think that's more of like for formats where people control 6 lands. So I would kind of be interested to see what like a green list of that deck looks like, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I think the incentive for green has been Tarmogoyf to beat the other red decks, but I don't know if you even do that anymore. When you play your Tarmogoyf and suddenly their Lumamancer is twice as big as your Tarmogoyf and maybe even has Trample too, like that doesn't seem like a winning line.
Yeah, that is some dicey stuff.
I think also if going back to the red deck versus Dredge discussion, one thing that the Shadow decks have started doing is just playing 4 Team of Battle Rages in the 75, because that, going back to the days when Gitaxian Probe was legal and Golgari Grave Troll, and you had the hyper-aggressive Death Shadow Zoo deck facing off against what at that time was fully powered Dredge, that was the way that you won from the Shadow side, was you just play this Splinter Twin style game of I have a gigantic Death Shadow and a team of Battle Rage. Those decks now, you have Scourge of the Skyclave, so that 1-2 punch is easier to assemble. For these white Paris builds, maybe you can still do that without Kiln Fiend, but if you are like a 4 Lumamancer, 4 Kiln Fiend, 4 TBR deck, I think you just Goldfish Dredge even through some of their best draws a lot of the time.
Yeah. If you really wanted to go hard, you could Assault Strobe people, which isn't out of range. It's 1 red, double strike, no trample. But if you have Lumamancer,
I've seen Assault Strobe show up in some blue-red lists where it goes very well with Sprite Dragon, because the evasion there kind of means that not having the trample from TBR is fine. You're willing to accept the discount instead. And Storming Entity, very quickly lethal with that card as well. But we could see that across the streams there as well. So for me, it was always a question of these two cards are 1 and 2. I'm assuming most other people will have them there as well. It's just a question of which order. But I was frankly stunned to see Thrilling Discovery not even appear on some lists.
Yeah, Ross specifically calling it out and saying that he wasn't interested in it was very interesting. Ross being historically a dredge pilot from back in the Golgari Grave Troll days. Wow, that was a mistake. Why did they let that one back? But continuing on, and he leaned into the argument about actually wanting the cards in your graveyard if it gets countered as like part of the issue, and kind of like the cathartic hands aren't even the good hands. But I think that Ox of Agonis changes that equation to like you're just always going to have the next dredge enabler from your graveyard every single time these days, and you can just adjust your he made this point about like white mana and red mana and blue mana and black mana, and like you can just ignore most of that. You just white red it up and call it a day. I think that that's fine. Also, that means that your dredge deck can like lean hard into the white red Horizon land and be super happy with it.
That did not even occur to me. But yeah, having a land which is not quite Cephalid Colosseum, but it's close enough. Once you get to that point, I think that's a big deal. I do think that there are diminishing returns of sorts on having this many good 2-mana enablers, where I think you would much rather have a kind of 6 or 7 out of 10 1-mana enabler that's maybe it's no Faithless Looting, but it's a decent impression, versus more Cathartic Reunions, because those 1-drop into 2-drop draws are the top of your range, versus Reunion into Reunion is more likely now, but you could already go Reunion into Ox, or like 1-mana enabler into 1-mana enabler into Ox. So I don't know if it moves the needle that much, but once you can rely on having Reunion, I think that changes how you can build your deck, where now maybe you don't go for some like Life in the Loam, Bloodghast, Conflagrate, Resilient endgame. You just go all in on, maybe Silver Smoke Goal is the card which I know I'm going to be dredging a bunch this turn, so I'm going to turn over a Creeping Chill, and that's going to trigger my Ghoul, and that's going to trigger all my Amalgams, and that big battlefield presence is now coming a turn sooner than maybe it does in typical dredge.
Yeah, and Thrilling Discovery gains 2 life, but not 3. But if you really wanted, you could put like a Golgari Brown Scale in your deck, get the 2 life back on that dredge, and that adds up. If in the worst case scenario where your chills are gone, or something horrible happens and you never hit one,
There's also Smiting Helix, which was briefly explored in dredge decks and never really stood the test of time, but maybe that's worth re-exploring now.
Yeah, now that you are going to be white-red, it's not like an extra color.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see graveyard decks and these aggro combo decks be even more a part of the modern metagame share than they are at the moment, which good news for some, maybe bad news for the rest of us, but we'll see. That covers certainly our top 5 lists and most of the cards that people recommended. But we also wanted to mix it up a little bit, because we don't just want the safe picks here. We want to call our shots. So we're going to go with what we're calling the Powerball, the long shot that definitely doesn't belong in the top 5 by any sensible metric. But hey, if it turns out to do something, you're going to sound like a genius. So what did you pick for that?
So I chose Body of Research. So this is the green, 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 blue, 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 make a token as big as your library. Figuratively, and I hope literally, like if people start showing up with this in paper, you really got to bring a large token. Like I want to see that giant penny or whatever on the table. So the reason I like this card is that I don't think there's a more effective direct way to produce something that is definitely a 2020 or bigger in Modern. Dark Depths is solidly on that ban list, and for good reason. This card does that. You have this 2-card combo where you give it haste or you fling it at your opponent. But unlike most 2-card combos in Modern, this is just a 6-mana 20/20 if you don't draw the other half. What are you going to do about it? If you just cast this card, your opponent has to block or kill it. And you can build, Splinter Twin fits into these kind of interactive decks. And this technically, in theory, could be one of those cards. But the big caveat is that Primeval Titan might be bigger than a 6-mana 20/20 in terms of what it does. So,
There's that recurring discussion of how big does a pure vanilla creature have to be at each mana cost in order to actually be good? And we kind of pushed the limits of that with Rotting Regisaur as a 3-mana 7/6, which had a drawback that sometimes you could turn to your advantage, but that card saw some play in Standard and never really made a dent beyond that. And I think that scales poorly the more expensive the creature is, where, I'm not sure what a 6-mana 20/20 is meant to be good against, unless you're using it with some kind of combo, as you say, to kill your opponent. And the two that came to mind when I saw you had chosen this card were Altar of Dementia, where if your library is bigger than theirs and you just one-hit KO them on the spot, and then Greater Good, where you can just, by definition, draw your entire deck, and then I guess if you can put Thassa's Oracle into play somehow, then you kill from there. Incidentally, Altar and Greater Good, both really sweet cards to pair with Uro, which, the most wholesome use anyone has ever found for that card, but guess that's relegated to Commander nowadays. But that would be where I was looking if I was going to try and just blow off some steam in a league or something.
Yeah, my issue with Greater Good is that we already have demonstrated with the people still clinging to their Gristlebrands that even if you draw your entire deck, it's actually just really, really hard these days to make mana. They're Mox Ambering into Springleaf. It's a mess. Just let them live in their world until they decide that they're ready to move on.
My plan for the closing segment for this week and a recurring segment for the show itself was going to be the weirdest deck that showed up in one of the league decklist dumps or one of the challenges for the week. And one of the front runners for sure was a Simian Spirit Guide less Neoform deck, which you have to draw your deck and then play a bunch of Mox Ambers, which only tap for black, so we need to fix that problem. But we have Springleaf Drum, so we can play that drum, and then I guess we don't even get to attack with our Grizzlebrand, not that we were able to easily anyway, but we tap that for blue, and then we play our Maniac, and then it's a lot of work for a deck that is not, maybe it was never good to begin with, and sorry to Jonathan Zhang and all of the other Grizzlebrand cultists out there, but I don't think the deck was ever that good, and it sure isn't now, so props to whoever that was for their good finish, but do not try that at home, unless you know what you're getting yourself into.
What was your long shot?
So mine was Prismari Command, which has 4 modes, and we're short on time. And I look, all the cards in this set are novels, and we don't need to validate that by reading them out loud. But this card is very flexible, very versatile. It's a good card. You can put it in your modern deck. So it might sound like kind of a cop-out for this, but the application that interests me, the hidden 5th mode, is you can use this to make a treasure token, to draw 2 cards, scar 2 cards, shock something for 2, and then
Shatter.
What am I forgetting here? Shatter, yeah. So creating an artifact, I think, is actually maybe the missing piece for Indomitable Creativity. So this is X triple red, so already a good start, and this is polymorph for X target artifacts or creatures you control. So in theory, the ceiling is higher on this than for your typical transmogrify polymorph that we already see in the format. And also more open-ended in terms of what you can use it with, where if you can make some food tokens or treasure tokens, then all of those are valid targets. But most of the cards that do that are just not very good in their own right. Prismari Command is a good card, and when you combine that with maybe something like Dwarven Mine, which you can get for free via your fetch lands if your mana base is configured a certain way, you can basically turn creativity into a 1-card combo that can get, I don't even know what the big finish is. Iona is good against some decks, but not others. Or that's really the issue holding it back, I think, is just making a non-hasty Emrakul or a non-hasty big thing actually is not reliably good against most opponents. But if they print something that solves that issue, I think everything else might be there for that deck now.
Yeah, so usually with cards like this, the 2 cards you get are Xenagos God of Revels and Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, and then Xenagos gives Emrakul haste and +15/+15, and that's good enough. But the problem with these decks has always been like you draw one of those cards and it just is in your hand and you don't know what to do with your life. Prismari Command sort of solves that with Emrakul. It puts it right back in your deck because you discard it and it shuffles, so that's pretty nice. Doesn't resolve the Xenagos issue, but I'm sure there's some other way around that.
Yeah, that combo is good. The issue is it's so much harder to get 2 good targets for creativity and that 5th mana than it is to get just 1. So I think, you can construct a lot of these good 2-card combinations, but I don't think that you can then get there in a way that makes the deck good enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is definitely an issue, is getting the second card for creativity. Especially because, you mentioned it destroy its artifacts or creatures, but it hits artifacts or creatures, so like you can't. There's a lot of restrictions on what you can actually have in your deck. You literally can just have like instants and sorceries and planeswalkers and enchantments.
Yeah, so we are always happy to hear feedback and we welcome that. So please get in touch if you have a response to any aspect of the show. But in particular, if you have a good setup for Indomitable Creativity in Modern, hit me up. If you crack the code, then by all means, write in and let us know. But moving on to a weird deck which has seen some success this week, just to close this out. The Neoform deck made a good case for itself, definitely getting the silver medal in terms of bad decks with good results from last week. But one that I think maybe actually has more legs is this 4-color Saheeli Luka deck that I found in one of the challenges this weekend.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I think it is winning in part on the back of like having a lot of good cards, and I think describing it as a Saheeli Luka deck to start is kind of like getting people to dismiss it. What it really is an extension of the Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl Blood Moon package that was good enough to let Ponza be a deck for a while. So it's probably good enough to let a deck with like actual good cards in it be okay. So this deck is backing those with the Felidar Guardian Saheeli Rai combo. It's got Oath of Nisa to fix all this. Oath of Nisa notably lets you do things through a Blood Moon, which is kind of important when your 4-color Blood Moon deck is on the table. Yeah, the 4-color Blood Moon deck. It's got Ren and 6, just a really stupid and powerful card. And then Karn the Great Creator to go with a toolbox sideboard. I am kind of disappointed to not see Esika's Chariot as one of the cards to Karn for, because there is a. Do you know?
Oh, that's smart. Yeah.
Do you know about the Saheeli Rai Esika's Chariot combo?
Yeah, so the way this works, and I've seen a few people explore this in Pioneer and Historic. Not Pioneer, actually, just Historic. But if you have Saheeli, then you play a Seeker's Chariot, you make 2 tokens, you then mine Saheeli to copy the Seeker's Chariot. So you now have a token copy of a Seeker's Chariot that has haste. And of course, when that token comes in, it creates 2 more tokens. So then you crew the chariot and you attack, and you can have that chariot target any token. And because the chariot itself is a token from Saheeli, it copies itself. So you now have a new non-attacking permanent token chariot that also brings 2 more tokens with it. So at the end of all of that convoluted sequence, you have a token chariot, which can go through the same rigmarole on following turns, and 6 cat tokens, which is a pretty good output for, if you're not able to actually go infinite.
Yeah, it is quite the strong duo there. Though I think if you have a Karn the Great Creator on the battlefield, maybe it's just like there's better things to do than figure out all this nonsense. Like you might be able to just liquid metal coating your opponent out of the game. But yeah, that combo is just, it's always fun to look at,
Yeah, notably, Karn can also crew, in air quotes, the chariot if you run out of actual crew members for that as well. But the mechanics of the combo here, which is what really caught my eye, was you have the copycat package, the Saheeli Rai Felidar Guardian thing, but Luka adds this weird element to this deck where if you have Saheeli, then Luka on your Arbor Elf or your Birds of Paradise, the only other creatures in the deck are 4 Felidar Guardian and 1 Emrakul. So you're guaranteed to get up to Felidar Guardian. If you have Saheeli, then you can try and combo off that way. But then if you don't, Felidar Guardian can blink Luka, and now you can minus Luka again on the Guardian to get Emrakul. So you have this way to stop the curve if you want to, and then also jump 11 spots up the curve to get to Emrakul if that's what you need instead.
Yeah, that is quite powerful. Just Luca turning any mana dork into an Emrakul. That is reminiscent of like the Kiki Pod chains, where you just start with like 2 arbitrary pieces of cardboard and then have to spend 5 minutes explaining to your opponent how they lost the game and there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, definitely a deck to when Paper Magic comes back to play at an FNM, combo off against someone new and never see them in the store at any point in the future. But maybe this deck is doing a little bit too much. There's a lot going on here, but each of the individual elements is powerful, and I think that combo core has a lot of potential to it.
Absolutely.
This is even glossing over the Macab Experiment Platinum Imperion package in the sideboard here, which I guess if you need something big to get with Khan, you have 8 mana, then Imperion can fill that void too. But I think that package is actually underrated as a pivot against the aggro decks, where, if you catch Dredge without the right sideboard cards, or you catch some of the Prowess decks without the right removal, then that just brickballs the game. And sometimes just wins the game on the spot for 4 mana through a Blood Moon, through, whatever interaction they have. So that's, again, that will not always be good, and it won't always be good in every matchup, but something to keep in mind if you know where the metagame's going and really want to hard target it somehow.
Yeah, and this deck can also just use the Empyrean in the spot of the Emrakul, right? You can just swap out what your big thing is and just change what you're Luca chaining into.
Absolutely. And maybe you, if you think that plan is good, maybe you're de-emphasizing the Luca stuff to begin with, although Khan means you don't really have the space for that, so you kind of are priced in anyway. But yeah, I would definitely recommend checking this decklist out. This is Chefen, Chefen, on Magic Online, so congrats on the good finish with this sweet deck. We'll try and link that in the show notes, although that's not something I believe I have the power to do, so just hoping on, whatever benevolent director is doing that on our behalf to fill that in. But many thanks to all of you for listening so far. Be sure to like and subscribe. We can be found on, let's see if I can get the exhaustive list here from memory, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, I believe is how you cover all your bases there.
Yeah, I think the other important one you missed might have been YouTube.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Just the most important platform for many metrics. Sure.
Yeah, and the other big thing, comment, leave a review. That's the big one for beating the online machine for these things. Because that's the important part of a podcast is we want to, you make podcasts because you like to see numbers go up. It's like an RPG in real life. And, leaving reviews really helps on that.
We have to beat all other media vying for human attention, but specifically we have to beat the rest of SUG's burgeoning media empire. So within the internal rankings, we want to be quickly rising up the chart there. So be sure to like, subscribe, leave constructive feedback, although if it's just, hey, we love you and we love the show, we'll accept that. No complaints there. But definitely excited to be in here with you every week, talking Modern from the top to the bottom. But that's going to do it for us this week. Do you have any final thoughts?
I really want to Gear Hulk a Magma Opus exactly once, and that is my starting hope for Strixhaven.
I think there are many formats where you'll get to live that dream, and hopefully Modern is one of those.
Yeah, I didn't even specify which Gear Hulk. It could be combustible, and that would be fine.
I would honestly applaud if you managed to successfully pull that off with combustible Gear Hulk, but I think Torrential is less ambitious, but still quite fun enough.
Absolutely.
All right, so thank you all once again for listening. We'll see you in here next time for more Dominaria's Judgment. Take care.